Hey, Bill Allen, welcome to the Preconstruction Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Gareth. Appreciate it.
Good, good. Thanks for coming on. Bill Allen, for anybody that doesn't know you, you're currently president of EvolveLAB. Before that, give us a quick overview of your career and how did you become president of your own firm?
Yeah, so prior to EvolveLAB, I worked primarily in architecture, working on stadiums and hospitals. I worked at HDR architecture for 8 years, was part of working on a lot of East Coast projects and Terry Lee hospitals, projects in Omaha, Nebraska, the Buffett Cancer Center. And then I moved out to Colorado 7 years ago as a BIM manager at Oz Architecture, BIM manager at Lance Bojo Architects, and then 2015 started EvolveLAB.
Beautiful, lovely. And how is it being your own boss?
It is the hardest job of my entire life.
And I can second that. It's not easy. Everybody thinks it's sunshine and roses, but it's far from it.
Yeah, it's like be your own boss so you can set your own hours and work when it's like, oh, do you mean like on nights and weekends, like running payroll and
exactly
managing your website and all of that?
It's much more difficult to set your own hours that you're not working. It's a lot quicker.
Yeah, that's right.
Cool. So give us an idea. 8 years at HDR, obviously that's the crux of your career prior to starting Evolve. How was it? And I mean, again, great experience. We all know HDR, fantastic company, working on huge projects, great projects. I'm sure it was a great development for you. And then within 8 years, how did you see it evolving, the BIM side?
Yeah, for sure. So like when I was there is when we started to adopt BIM and use BIM as part of our process. One of the cool things about working at HDR is it is a full service firm. So it had structure, architecture, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, signage and wayfinding, healthcare consulting. And then I was in their corporate office, the mothership as they called it. And so in Omaha, Nebraska. And so you had all the executive team for, HDR overall there. And so a big part of what we were trying to do in that corporate office was to set protocol standards, having BIM meetings, et cetera, to kind of understand how we were going to execute projects, from our BIM execution plan all the way through the entire process. So yeah, that was a big learning curve and pretty pinnacle for, what I felt like was a foundation for the rest of my career. And then also we had BIMBO, the BIM board of Omaha that I was on as well.
Who came up with that name? I love it.
Yeah, I think it was Todd Shackelford there. So shout out to Todd in Omaha. I think he started that and invited me to be a part of it. And so yeah, we had BIMBO, the BIM board of Omaha. And so that was kind of cool to transcend outside and learn how other companies were operating as well. So.
Good. Yeah. And I have to say, I started this Preconstruction podcast at the beginning of the year, and I'm doing everything: owners, architects, engineers, contractors. But within the BIM VDC it's almost like a vertical in itself. Everybody's super helpful. They really do look after each other. And if there's anything you need, they're always willing to help.
Totally. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, the culture around pre-construction, subcontractors, it's a great group. I like it.
Good, love it. So obviously HDR, then you were a professor for a year. How was that? Did that give you an insight into, that was along with your last year at HDR, isn't that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How was that? How was it kind of teaching the next generation?
Yeah, so I was teaching at University of Nebraska, Omaha, part of their engineering group. And the main goal was to try to prepare them for what I wanted to do. Is there was a lot of criticism around academia and really not preparing students very well for real world scenarios. So doing a lot of great design principles, but not teaching people how buildings go together or teaching people how to leverage the software in real world scenarios. And so the thing I really wanted to try to do as part of my mission when I was there was to try to really teach the students real world applications for design, engineering, fabrication, installation, and the overall process. We talked contracts. To really try to prepare them as much as I could given my experience at HDR for a real world scenario on actual projects.
I love it. And I'm sure they got real value in that. Funny, I've got a podcast. I recorded it at the beginning of the week. It's going to be coming out in the next 2 weeks with Nick Sensky. He's professor at Iowa State. And he talks about a lot of what we're going to talk about, especially computational design within construction. So I'm really looking forward to that coming out, but also complementing his chat with your chat, because I think they'll go really well together. So let's jump straight into that now. Before we go into computational design within construction, and that's kind of what's happening right now, let's go back and talk about generative design. I think you did an article or a bit of information on generative design is doomed to fail. Give us a kind of a background on that and give us your thoughts.
Yeah, for sure. So a good friend of mine, Daniel Davis, did an article called Generative Design is Doomed to Fail. And it's kind of a critique of a lot of the Autodesk marketing material that we're receiving these days as of recent. And it was really kind of a question back as a counterpoint asking, is generative design doomed to fail? To kind of question some of those principles and understand there are issues, challenges around generative design, computational design, but is it, quote, doomed to fail? You know, are we able to overcome some of these obstacles and some of these challenges as a race and as an industry? So that was one of the things that I wanted to kind of ask as a counterpoint to encourage like healthy dialogue, healthy conversation, iron sharpening iron, and seeing if we actually felt like it was doomed to fail. And so it's just a counterpoint or a counter argument to Daniel's post, which I appreciate. Daniel is very thought provoking and it really spurred a lot of great conversations. So.
Good. And that's what it's all about. It's all about challenging each other and making this world a little bit better and how we build things. And give us an idea of the couple of things that came out of that maybe you were surprised about.
Yeah, for sure. So like one of the most common, I think, misconceptions and the point that he made is he said more options don't necessarily mean best options. So we get all these, marketing material and you get thousands of options, but does that actually mean that it's a better design? And so I actually agree with him. More options doesn't necessarily mean better options. However, to go back to my days at HDR, I remember, I'd work 8-10 hours a day. There's only so many designs I could crank out in that amount of time. And so and if you think of your time, my time, and Warren Buffett, all of us, the common thing we have in common is 24 hours in a day. We all have the same amount of time. But what generative design allows us to do is create more designs with the same amount of time, which is pretty fascinating. If you think about it, it's this time multiplier. And then if you multiply that by data, that's the key. That was my counterpoint, is like, okay, more designs don't necessarily mean a better design. However, if you leverage data associated to that design as part of analytics and optimization, you can actually come up with a better design, in my opinion. And further, his point is that you don't really have a nice way to interrogate these designs. But my counterpoint was you actually do get these nice parallel graph charts, and you can do cross-product optimization. And so being able to leverage mins and maxes as it relates to the data allows you to have a better design ultimately.
Yeah, and essentially, I interviewed an architect down in Charlotte recently as well, and he basically says BIM has allowed me to do what I should be doing, which is actually putting out more designs.
Definitely, for sure, yeah.
And that has to be good on all points. So that and then how does that tie in now with computational design? How is that going to help architects, contractors come up with more designs, better designs?
Yeah, so one of the things I did not anticipate starting EvolveLAB, my background's been architecture, and we're now working with KHS&S Construction, PCL Construction, Mortensen Construction, working on leveraging computational design principles for construction. And so this is something I absolutely did not anticipate. And I haven't seen it anywhere really published, but what I'm calling it is computational construction. And so the idea of applying these principles to that process. So I think that architects, a lot of the publications go and they get to have a lot of the fun. But if you think of contractors leveraging some of these things, being able, like as an example, we created a hangar heat map, for Mortensen Construction, or to be able to do auto routing, rather than having these very long, exhaustive coordination meetings. Wouldn't it be sweet if you could optimize pipe and ductwork and things like that, generatively modeling those rather than spending hours and weeks in a trailer trying to move a piece of ductwork or a piece of pipe, you know, to have it auto route. And to think about, you could say, you know, minimum amount of bends with the maximum amount of airflow quality with the minimum amount of distance, you know, so that's a very real example of applying some of those kind of computational principles towards MEP in fabrication. So that's something that I think is absolutely very, very exciting. I think we're very just on the cusp of something very special in that industry.
Brilliant. And it's amazing, you pointed out as well, it's amazing how much the general contractor is taking this on board. I mean, usually they would have just left it to the architect, and the architect would have kind of sent it to them, whether it was half done, a quarter done, not done at all. But now they're literally taking control from very, very early stage. And even never mind the contractor, the subcontractors are getting involved at a very early stage, whether it is the electrical or the mechanical contractor. This can only be a good thing.
100%. Yeah, we're seeing a fundamental shift in risk allocation going from architects to contractors, subcontractors, and they're being rewarded for that risk, both financially as well as projects. So I think it's a huge opportunity for them. Plus, it's just pragmatic. Like, I can't tell you how many coordination projects I've been on where you receive some kind of design MEP model and it's just garbage, to be frank. Yeah. You know, like there's just literally pipes running inside the ductwork. The stuff doesn't fit in the chase. And so when you're not figuring out those issues, and then, you know, in construction, now you're having to move walls, you're having to drop ceilings, make the chase bigger because it wasn't well designed at the front end. So like, if you can get those subcontractors and contractors on earlier to help with that process, that's only going to make the project better for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And are you seeing a shift? And you may see this because you basically deal with them all, the owners, the architects, and the contractors. You're talking about risk there. Do you see you're getting a shift towards the contractor? Do you see at the end of that shift the contractor being the sole proprietary of the model and them running it?
It's a really good question. I mean, ultimately, I would say the owner owns it if they're paying if they're writing the check, you know, like they're going to receive the model. So I would say the owner ultimately downstream would receive the model. Contractors, though, are taking on a lot of the risk. And it does beg the question of who owns the data associated to the model. I think contracts help with that, and contracts are catching up to that question. But I would advocate, in my personal opinion, say the owner should own it, given that they're paying for the data set.
Yeah, and that was my next question. The data set. I mean, I think you mentioned it pre-recording. It's data is now worth more than gold and oil. I mean, will the owner? I mean, surely the contractor, especially if they're going to do these projects from every 2 years, similar projects, surely it's within their interest to keep the data, or even ask the owner as part of the contract to have a copy of the data or the data itself.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Yeah, I think they should. And I think it comes down to, can you share the data? Almost like software, can you sub-license the data back to the contractor? How do we monetize data associated to that? I think we're really on the early stages of that, and no one has, in my opinion, has really had the conversation, or I haven't at least, to talk about ownership of the data and who owns it, quote unquote, in its most macro sense. You know, like if contractors are authoring the data, maybe they should own it. I think we talk about model handoffs, data sets, things like that, but I haven't seen anything that would limit a general contractor or subcontractor from leveraging that data on future projects, keeping it on their servers, etc. However, I would also, as a counterpoint to that, would say that should not negate the owner from also leveraging that data. And I think it's good, healthy conversation of the democratization of data and how we're able to share data with each other or not share, and if people feel like it's proprietary to them and their process. It's a really good question. I would say I don't have the answer on that, but I think we should definitely have a conversation about it.
Brilliant, big time. And then the whole extraction of data from historical projects, you mentioned that's quite a lot of what you do right now at EvolveLAB. Give me an idea of that process and how many contractors do you see are willing to do that, willing to put in the time and the resources?
Yeah, definitely. We're seeing it all across spectrums, architects, engineers, and contractors doing project data extraction. And the benefit is hindsight is always 20/20, right? So if we're able to look at projects, we might have an idea about how much a project costs, procurement of that project, but to be able to go back and actually start to leverage data extraction for these, building out dashboards, that's a big part of what we do. And so we're seeing a lot of contractors, both from an estimation standpoint, from a scheduling standpoint, sequencing, okay, this is what we thought the schedule was going to be, this is what it actually ended up being, this is what we thought the project was going to cost, this is what it actually cost. And then, you know, a lot of contractors have their own kind of proprietary Excel spreadsheets and project material costing and things like that, but no one's really connecting the dots between those spreadsheets and the model and being able to create that connection of the project. And then having all of these projects come into a central repository as a database to be able to leverage that information for said future projects. So yeah, we're doing a lot of data extraction right now and then building out the dashboards, you know, for those contractors.
Brilliant. I love it. And then you mentioned a couple of big contractors there, PCL, Mortensen, but you do target and work with a lot of small to medium-sized businesses. It must be great for them to be able to kind of just bring you on and say, listen, this bill is what we're really looking for. This is, how can you help us? How much satisfaction do you get in that? Because like you, we're a small to medium-sized business. We don't always have the resources of the big guys. Do you see more and more SMEs coming to you and saying, listen, how can we leverage your knowledge? Yeah,
so not as a pitch for us, but that's the whole reason I started EvolveLAB is I was a BIM manager at these other bigger firms, you know, 10,000 plus employees. You have your national BIM director and your digital design manager in every office, and then your digital design. I mean, it is a spider web of support for these massive firms. And what I noticed was you have all these kind of small to medium-sized firms. They don't have the overhead for, you know, this full-time BIM director, but they still need to implement these processes to compete, you know, with some of these bigger guys. And so that's a big part of what we do is trying to support the small to medium-sized firms to leverage computational construction and to leverage data-driven design. Without necessarily having the overhead of a full-time, you know, BIM director of EDC.
So, Bill, yeah, thanks for that overview on data. I mean, data to me, it's going to be the future, and I think you said that as well. Another thing that's really hot at the moment and topical is modular construction prefabrication, and I know that's something that you come across all the time. Give us an idea of what's happening out there in that space.
Yeah, for sure. So I think what might help with that is the context of like, I was trying to push some of this about 10 plus years ago, and some of the criticism I received around it is, you know, like when we apply these kind of techniques to a car, you know, like, okay, we have this industrial revolution, and you have the assembly line. The idea was, could you start applying some of these same kind of industrial principles to buildings? And the criticism around that is that, you know, every building's different. It's unique. You're not building the same, you know, Toyota Camry on this assembly line. You're building a new hospital or a civic center or a strip mall or whatever. But the idea of modular construction is I think it's a scalability and a pixelation. So if you have a building that you can break down into a kit of parts, then it becomes scalable. So a good example of this is like Prescient. Okay, they're still using kind of stick frame construction, metal studs. But what they do is they have it based on a 2-foot grid spacing, this kind of modular set of constraints and rules. And so if you could start to apply a scalability to these items in that kind of kit of parts, I think that's where modular construction really shines. And then also, I mean, there's only so many different ways you can design a kitchen or a bathroom. So, I mean, when you have, you know, a set of different designs, layouts, those things can be prefabricated. And the other nice thing about this is that it's not contingent on weather and other things. You're able to build these things inside of a warehouse. The one hard part is distribution and being able to ship them. You know, where do you put, you know, your bathroom at and then put it on a flatbed, ship it off to a site? Those are some of the challenges that we have to overcome is as it relates to having the roadways and getting things to places in a timely, efficient manner. But we're not contingent on other things like weather and other metrics such as that. So.
Yeah, and I love your comparison to the cars, because if you think about it, and now listen, I'm not a car guy or how they go together, but from what I do know from dealing with cars and mechanics, 10, 15, it might have been 20, 25, 30 years ago, a car was built in Germany, Mercedes-Benz, it was all built there. But now if you go and buy a car, it might have a Peugeot engine or a Citroen engine, and it's just a different facade, and it literally is a combination of United Nations kind of parts and shipping from everywhere. So I mean, and that is exactly what you said. If you break down a hospital into all different parts, they can be built everywhere and just brought on site right away and just put together.
Yeah, no, that's a really good analogy and really good point that you just made. 100% agree with you for sure.
Yeah, very good. And then the other thing and topic, and I hear it all the time, we had a great Chad Holbrook, a great interview. He was a BIM VDC manager for down in Charlotte, and he talked about 3D scanning. Now, I know this is a thing that you're getting demand from a lot from clients, and then historical buildings, 3D scanning, and then putting as-built together. How difficult is that, and how important is it, especially for facilities management firms or completely integrated companies that are looking after them afterwards?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's fascinating. Like, I very much geek out about the whole photogrammetry, LiDAR scanning, all the different scanners and the output you get from those. I think the problem that we've had traditionally with the way that we've tried to capture as-built, at least speaking for myself personally, I've been out there on site with a notepad and a laser and trying to put down measurements. And then you go back to the office, you're like, shit, I forgot to get the window seal. Or you go back, you start modeling, you have this bust on the corner. Is it a 7? Is it a 4? I don't know. Where like a laser scan captures everything. As long as you can see it, you can scan it. And so I think that's where it's extremely advantageous, both from a risk standpoint, right? Because now we're not writing down wrong numbers, or it's not prone to the human error, but also from an efficiency standpoint, you can drop these, and they're only getting faster. Like, you used to have just, a scanner on a tripod, you move it every 5 to 7 feet, try to get all the overlap. Now the scanners are getting so darn efficient that you can just walk with one on your backpack, or even the idea of robotics, putting these things on a robot.
Just send spot in, huh?
That's right. Yeah. Just send it out there. So I think that's absolutely fascinating. And so we wanted to start getting into that, not really from a business stand, but just because I geek out about it. I think it's a cool technology, and that's part of why we do what we do, is because it's fun. So that's why. So we started on-point scanning about 2 years ago as an opportunity to do kind of more as-built captures. So we're doing more, I would say, like LiDAR scanning for architects, and then we're doing more kind of like photogrammetry, construction progress scanning for contractors, because they want to see where the pipe is before they sheetrock, and where we actually had an issue where they were arguing about a can light. They're like, oh, there's a can light there. No, there's not. Yes, there is. No, there's not. Yes, there is. And sure enough, someone had drywall, over the can light in the project, and they never cut it back out. And we were looking at the scan, and sure enough, like in the scan, there was a can light, behind the sheetrock. So, yeah,
that's it. I mean, to me, safety is paramount, and safety can start within pre-construction. It doesn't start whenever the project is there's a hole in the ground, and I think that's a fascinating side to it as well that people forget about. But I mean, 3D scanning will help that enormously. So. It's a must. I think out of all the 4 or 5 points that we touched on, I think that one's going to be one of the most important, and it's here to stay.
Yeah, for sure. Totally agree.
Good. So give us, Bill, I know you're a busy guy. You've got EvolveLAB, on-point scanning. What do you do to relax, or how do you relax?
Yeah, so I traditionally have been very bad about this. This year I've gotten better. I can really struggle. Like, I don't turn off. Like, even when I'm done, quote, working, I'm on LinkedIn researching, seeing new technology, sharing it with my team. I don't shut off, which is, I want to say, not a good thing. So what I'm trying to get better at is self-care and things like that. So some of the things that I do for fun is I recently purchased a summer board. I don't know if you've seen or heard these.
No.
it's an electric skateboard that you ride like a snowboard. So it has,
Wow.
yeah, so you have your outside wheels like you do with a skateboard, but then directly underneath the board, there's these two casters, these center casters that rotate 360 degrees. And so you can actually ride on those center casters, and it's electric. And so you can pivot and ride like a snowboard on, pavement, being able to do 180s or 360s or just carve. And so that's something that I recently got about 2 months ago and have been enjoying that in some of my downtime.
So, Bill, why is there not like loads of scratches on your face? That sounds dangerous.
Oh, I've biffed it hard on that thing. Definitely 100%.
Wow.
I felt, I've gotten bloodied and bruised on that thing well enough. So
that sounds quality. Now, I've done snowboarding before and I've done skateboarding, but this sounds like, was it difficult? I mean, you're only 2 months in. Are you good at it now, or?
I would say I'm good at it now, but the learning curve is very steep. It's very awkward at the beginning. It's very difficult. Like they say, it usually will take 3 sessions before it quote clicks. Really, what it is the mindset is you have to think of it like a snowboard. So you're riding heel edge, toe edge, heel edge, toe edge. Once you get that, then you got it. But yeah, the learning curve is pretty steep.
Because that sounds exactly when I switched from skis to snowboarding, I struggled a lot. I mean, my bum was just in constant pain for 4 or 5 days. And it literally, and like I would consider my background sport as well. I played soccer for 12 years professionally. So I would have considered myself a little bit eye-hand coordination, all not too bad. But I really struggled with snowboarding. And there was a point after, I think maybe mid-day 4, that I thought, where's my skis? I'm going back on the skis. So that sounds, and have you always snowboarded? Was it a similar learning curve with this new board?
Yeah, so I always skateboarded. I was a big skateboarder growing up, and I did a fair amount of wakeboarding as well. I went snowboarding once, and similar to your experience, I thought, even being on a board all that time, I thought I'd pick up snowboarding, and I was horrible at it. Like my bum as well was so sore. It's like, oh, do you ski or do you snowboard? Well, I fall a lot. That's what I do. So it was very difficult. And you're riding on pavement, so it's not as forgiving as snow either. And so you really have to try to be conscious of that. And I definitely have fallen and bruised myself on this thing. So
very good. Right. Okay. That's I'll take your word for it. I'm going to have to try it. I'm going to Google it now when I get off here. Good. So, and I mentioned before pre-recording as well, we do move a lot of people to Colorado. Great place. Haven't been yet. It's on the list. Give us an idea of what they can expect when they get there.
Oh man, it's beautiful here. We feel so fortunate and blessed to live here. People, to your point, do pay to vacation here, like come here. So the fact to be able, it's similar to New York where you're at, people do pay to go to New York and experience New York and vacation there. So, but Colorado is beautiful. I would say almost every Sunday we try to get in the mountains. My family and I, we go up there, we go picnic and check out Estes Park. We're only 30-minute drive from Rocky Mountain National Park. The views in and of themselves are incredible. It's very expensive to live here, though. There's a lot of people moving here, so similar to New York, it is expensive. But it's one of the most beautiful places in the United States. I can't say enough, good things about the scenery and the experience and the culture. I mean, the culture here, you get hiking, you get snowboarding and skiing. It has a great beer scene, so there's great craft beer here. The culture here is really, really cool. So we love Colorado.
Brilliant. I love it. Yeah, no, it's definitely on the list. I think I mentioned to you before, the Preconstruction Podcast was all about me going and visit various cities and experience different cultures. So post-COVID, there's a lot of places I need to go, and Colorado's definitely up there. So thank you for that. Well, Bill, listen, this has been invaluable. I'm really looking forward to getting this out here. Just for people that if they want to get in contact with you, if they're listening to the podcast and say, I want to hit up Bill with a question or a query, where's the best place to get you?
Yeah, so if you just go EvolveLAB.io, that's where we're at. We have a ton of free resources on there too. So if anyone's trying to learn computational construction or Dynamo, we have e-learning courses for those, Rhino Inside, Revit. All those are currently free on the website, and then the blog, there's tons of information on there. So if you just check out evolvelab.io, and you can just reach out on the website and get a hold of me on that. So
brilliant. That's if you don't hurt yourself.
That's right.
On that crazy sport. Well, listen, thank you very much, Bill. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, appreciate you, Gareth. Thanks for having me.